So the next topic is regarding the bronchopulmonary segments. So before learning about bronchopulmonary segments, we need to know the lobar anatomy of both the lungs. So this is the right lung, this is the left lung in a 3D anatomy. So here this is the better view of the right lung. This right lung has three lobes, 1, 2, and 3. This right lung has 1, 2, and 3 lobes, which are divided by two fissures. This fissure is called as a transverse fissure, and this fissure is called as an oblique fissure anteriorly. So this transverse fissure is dividing the upper lobe and the middle lobe, and the oblique fissure is dividing the middle lobe and the lower lobe. This is oblique fissure and this is a transverse fissure. Yeah, so this is a transverse fissure. So oblique fissure dividing the lung into upper, middle, and lower lobe, the right lung. Regarding the left lung, there are only two lobes because of the left lung gives space for the heart to accommodate. Therefore, there are only two lobes for left lung. These two lobes of left lung are divided by a fissure called as oblique fissure into upper and lower lobe. Yeah, that's about it. So what is the lobar anatomy of the lungs? So initially there is something called as trachea over here. So the trachea, this is a trachea. Trachea is divided into two bronchi or primary bronchi. The first generation bronchi are called as primary bronchi. These two primary bronchi, there is an angle between these two primary bronchi called as carina. Carina, C-A-R-I-N-A, carina. Carina is the angle between two primary bronchi. This angle is such a way that the right primary bronchi is more vertical than the left primary bronchi. Therefore, there is more chances of foreign body or any infections or any effusions or aspirations into the right lung because it is more vertical because of the angle made by carina. Yeah, so the two primary bronchi at the primary bronchi are supplying the complete lungs of one side. Each primary bronchi is divided into secondary bronchi at the second generation bronchi, which is supplying to the lobes of the lung. Like for the upper lobe, one secondary bronchi; for middle lobe, one secondary bronchi; for the lower lobe, one secondary bronchi. Therefore, these three secondary bronchi, otherwise called as lobar bronchi. Secondary bronchi, otherwise called as lobar bronchi. For right lung, there are three lobes. Therefore, three secondary bronchi or three lobar bronchi. For the left lung, there are only two lobes, upper and lower, divided by an oblique fissure. Therefore, they have only two secondary bronchi. These are the two secondary bronchi or the lobar bronchi for the left lung. Next, each secondary bronchi or lobar bronchi is now supplying specialized tissue of each lobe. Each lobe of lung is further divided into segments. So this is the 1, 2, 3 segments of the upper lobe. So each secondary bronchi or the lobar bronchi gives rise to a segmental bronchi, otherwise called as tertiary bronchi. So segmental bronchi, tertiary bronchi is supplying a segment of a lobe, each segment of a lobe. So this each segment is called as bronchopulmonary segment. So this is about the gross view of the lobar anatomy. Now regarding the bronchopulmonary segments, which is an important 10 marks question too in first MBBS. What is the definition? How we can define the bronchopulmonary segment right now? We can define it such a way that it is the lung tissue which is aerated by which bronchi is this? Tertiary bronchi. As simple as that. So bronchopulmonary segment is a part of lung which is aerated by tertiary bronchi, which is otherwise called as segmental bronchi. That's it. So how many bronchopulmonary segments are there for each lung? For right lung, okay, what is the importance of these bronchopulmonary segments? The applied aspect of these bronchopulmonary segments are they are surgically resectable segments. That is, each segment has its own neurovascular bundle and can be resected surgically whenever needed. Yeah, so they are surgically resectable segments. They have own neurovascular bundle. They are separate. Each bronchopulmonary segments are divided by a septum between them called as intersegmental alveolar septum. So there is a intersegmental septum between two. They are easily separated and therefore can be easily surgically resectable segments. Each segment is surgically resectable. So regarding the right lung, if we discuss about the right lung has three lobes, 1, 2, 3. Each lobe has its own segments. So already if you can see over here, for the upper lobe of the right lung, we have 3 segments, which is at the top called as apical segment, which is anterior segment, which is posterior segment. That's it. So this is the apical segment of the right lung, I mean upper lobe of the right lung. This is the anterior segment, this is the posterior segment. That's it. So apical, anterior, posterior bronchopulmonary segments are the 3 segments of upper lobe of right lung. Very easy. So these are the lung tissue which is supplied by what bronchioles? Tertiary or segmental bronchioles. So tertiary or segmental bronchi, not bronchioles. Tertiary or segmental bronchi. Yeah. So next, regarding the middle lobe over here, if you can see the three-dimensional structure over here, this is more anterior. The middle lobe is more anterior in its regional anatomy. Therefore, it has 2 segments. One is medial, other one is which is more lateral. Therefore these 2 segments are called as medial and lateral segments, as simple as that. So here medial bronchopulmonary segment and lateral bronchopulmonary segment are the segments of middle lobe of right lung. Regarding the lower lobe, this is a complete lower lobe in which there is a segment at the apex. This is called as apical segment of lower lobe, and there are 4 segments over here, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So the 4 segments over here, which is anterior most, which is posterior most, which is medial inside, which is medial, and which is lateral, which is outside. Therefore 4 segments. These 4 segments of the lower lobe are forming the base of the lung. Therefore they are named as, here we should focus, the lower lobe has apical BPS, which is at the apex, anterior basal, posterior basal, which is anterior and posterior, forming the base. A medial basal, which is on the medial surface, which is not visual, which cannot be seen on the anterior surface, or which cannot be seen on the lateral surface of this lobe, which is seen in the medial surface. It's a medial basal, and there's a lateral basal bronchopulmonary segments. Therefore there are 5 bronchopulmonary segments for the lower lobe of right lung. This is about the right lung. Yeah. So totally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 bronchopulmonary segments for the right lung. So these bronchopulmonary segments are separated with each other with the help of are separated by a intersegmental alveolar septum, and they can be easily they can be surgically resected. Regarding the left lung, there are only 2 lobes. Therefore, 2 primary bronchi. Number 1, each primary bronchi is giving rise to, regarding the left lung, there are 2 lobes. Therefore, there are only 2 lobar bronchi or secondary bronchi. So the lower lobe follows the same rule as the right lung. That is, there is an apical basal, anterior basal, posterior basal, medial basal, and a lateral basal. These 5 segments will be there. But the important thing over here is, since in the left side over here, this is a left lung. Where there is a medial basal over in the medial region. In the medial surface, there is a medial basal segment. Here this is the lower lobe of the left lung, where medial inside there is a medial segment should be there. So this medial segment, usually because of the presence of heart, that to the left ventricle is related to this segment. Since it is the largest cavity of the heart, this medial segment of the lower lobe of the left lung is not well developed in left lung. So this medial basal lobe is not well developed in the left lung because of presence of the heart, mainly the left ventricle region of the heart. Therefore this will usually fuse with the anterior segment. It will fuse with its anterior segment. As you can see over here, if this is the anterior segment, the medial segment, which is inside on the medial surface, this will fuse with the anterior segment usually to form an anteromediobasal, which forms an anteromediobasal segment. And lateral basal is as it is. This is regarding the lower lobe. Regarding the upper lobe has 3 plus 2. The 3 are same as the right lung, that is apical, anterior and posterior. The other 2 are their tongue-like segmental projections called as superior lingular and inferior lingular bronchopulmonary segment. So if you calculate finally, The right lung has total 10 bronchopulmonary segments. The left lung has also 10, but the medial basal, which we discussed, is usually not much developed, and it forms anteromedial basal. Therefore, usually 9. So, surgically, and basically, though it is 10, it is more practically 9 bronchopulmonary segments are present for the left lung. So, yeah, right lung, which has 3 lobes. In these 3 lobes, that is superior lobe, middle lobe, and inferior lobe. In these 3 lobes, we have 3 segments: an apical, an anterior, and a posterior segment. 3 segments: 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. Middle lobe has 2 segments: a medial segment, which is more medial, a lateral segment, which is more lateral. Yeah. The lower lobe, you can see over here, the lower lobe has an anterior basal, this is a posterior basal, medial basal, and lateral basal. So these are the 4 lobes of the right lung. What about the left lung? Left lung, you can see over here, left lung also have a superior lobe and inferior lobe. Inferior lobe, one and the same. The anterior mediobasal, the anterior, that is the this is the anteromediobasal. It is fused with the medial to form anteromediobasal, and there is a posterobasal, lateral basal, as it is over here. There is a posterobasal and lateral basal. Yeah, and obviously there is an apical segment for inferior too. Yeah. Other than these things, for superior lobe also we have anterior, medial, and lateral. Anterior, medial, and lateral. Other than that, we have two lingular, so 2 segments which have tongue-shaped projections called as this one, superior lingular and inferior lingular. Yeah, superior lingular and inferior lingular segments. Yeah, superior lingular and inferior lingular segments, which are synonymous to middle lobes. This thing, yeah, superior lingular and inferior lingular segments. Yeah, another important term, another important point we discussed is 2 bronchopulmonary segments are separated by intersegmental alveolar septum. If this is one bronchopulmonary segment, if this is another bronchopulmonary segment, these two are separated by a septum called as intersegmental alveolar septum. So what you need to know, what are the contents of a bronchopulmonary segments and what is the content of intersegmental septum. These 2 things we need to know. So for that, for yeah, each lobe, each segment is supplied by the segmental bronchi or the tertiary bronchi, from where the exchange part starts. There's a transition zone called as terminal bronchi over here, terminal bronchioles over here. After the terminal bronchioles, it enters into respiratory bronchioles and then into the alveolar duct and alveoli. These are the alveolar duct and the alveoli. So these are the contents: terminal bronchioles, which continues as respiratory bronchioles, and then into the alveolar duct and alveoli are the contents of a bronchopulmonary segment. Along with that, there are vascular structures, which are the bronchial artery and the pulmonary artery. Very important, bronchial artery and pulmonary artery. This pulmonary artery is the artery which is bringing the deoxygenated blood from the heart for oxygenation. And what is this content of intersegmental region or the intersegmental septum? This one, which carries the oxygenated blood towards the heart, that is the pulmonary vein and its branches, are the contents of intersegmental septum. So here, this is the pulmonary vein. So what happens is, into the bronchopulmonary segment, the pulmonary trunk gives its rise to its own pulmonary artery, and oxygenation occurs at the alveolar at the gas exchange occurs over here, and it enters after the oxygenation. The blood enters into this pulmonary vein and it goes to the heart. Oxygenated blood will go to the heart right now through this pulmonary vein. So this is one bronchopulmonary segment. If this is one bronchopulmonary segment, this is another bronchopulmonary segment. There is a intersegmental region. So here you can see there is a terminal bronchiole over here. This terminal bronchiole are giving rise to the respiratory bronchioles. These respiratory bronchioles are giving rise to the alveolar ducts along with the alveoli. Alveolar ducts with the alveoli. Alveolar ducts with the alveoli. Okay, yeah. So these are the contents. Along with them, we have this blue labeled artery, that is deoxygenated blood carrying artery, called as pulmonary artery. So this artery is called as pulmonary. Yeah, this is a pulmonary artery coming from the right heart. Pulmonary artery coming from the right heart. It's carrying deoxygenated blood. Okay, here it is forming the capillaries at the alveolar capillary membrane. They forming the capillaries at the region of alveoli, and after oxygenation, it is entering into another structure called as pulmonary vein, which is going towards the left heart, where it is present outside the bronchopulmonary segment. So the structure present outside the bronchopulmonary segment is pulmonary vein. It's very important question too. So it's going towards left heart. This is the bronchopulmonary segment. After oxygenation, it is going to pulmonary vein towards the heart. Yeah. So this is the segmental anatomy of bronchopulmonary segment. Something about blood supply of lungs. Okay, we discussed everything right now. Something about blood supply of lungs. Lungs is mainly supplied by bronchial artery. Yeah. So the pulmonary artery and pulmonary vasculature is for oxygenation purpose, but the main blood supply of lungs is bronchial artery. So this bronchial artery is supplying right and left lung up till the respiratory bronchiole. Until the respiratory bronchiole, it is supplied by bronchial artery itself. Later on, the alveolar ducts and the alveoli, only they are supplied by the nearest artery for them, that is the pulmonary vasculature or the pulmonary artery. So what happens over here? Up to respiratory bronchiole, it is bronchial artery on the right side and left side. Where it is coming from? I mean, we need to trace it out in an atlas. I'll advise you to trace it out in an atlas that the right sided bronchial artery should come from third right posterior intercostal artery. So you can trace it out in an atlas if you have an atlas. Next, the left sided artery, left sided bronchial artery, which is supplying the left lung until the respiratory bronchiole, is directly coming from the descending thoracic aorta. I want you to trace it out. If possible, trace it out in an atlas. You will remember well. And this is an important entrance question too. Aorta, thoracic aorta. This is thoracic aorta. These are the left superior and inferior bronchial artery. So these are the left bronchial artery. Their left is directly coming from thoracic aorta itself. But here, if we can see, there is a third right posterior intercostal artery, which is arising from here. Third posterior intercostal artery, which is arising from here, and it is giving rise to a branch called as right bronchial artery. So right bronchial artery should be a branch of this third right posterior intercostal artery, which is also coming from thoracic aorta only, but the left bronchial arteries are directly coming from aorta. So this is a dissected specimen. This should be like this. Yeah. Below the respiratory bronchioles, that is the alveolar ducts and the alveolar cavities, here the pulmonary artery, the pulmonary circulation will supply. This is of the blood supply of lungs in detail. Regarding the applied aspects over here, number one, regarding the bronchopulmonary segments, first applied aspect is they are surgically resectable segments because they have individual neurovascular bundle. Yeah, they have individual airway also. So they are surgically resectable segment. Number one. Number two, very, very important. What is a dependent, which is the deepest bronchopulmonary segment, is very important. As we already know, as we already discussed, carina is the angle between the two primary bronchi. So this carina angle is in such a way that the right bronchi is more vertical. The right bronchi is more vertical and the left bronchi is more horizontal. Therefore, right bronchi is the most common site for aspirations, foreign body, infections too. But which is the dependent part in this right lung? That we need to know. That is on standing position, on a still position or a standing position. If you see in this diagram, on a standing position in the right lung, this is the right lung, right? Or this is the right lung. You can see the posterobasal, this one, the posterobasal, this one, the posterobasal or the right posterobasal will be the most dependent part with respect to gravity or in terms of gravity. Therefore, this is the most common site for effusions, aspirations. This lobe is most commonly affected. Even, yeah, that is right posterobasal, PB. So that is right posterobasal. Yeah, number one. In standing still position or standing position. In supine position, when a patient is lie down in a supine position, obviously something over here, this will become the dependent region. This will become the dependent. This is the apical lobe, apical segment of, this is the apical segment of lower lobe, right? So that's what I mentioned over here. In a standing position, the right lung's posterobasal lobe becomes the most dependent part. In supine region, right, apical bronchopulmonary segment will of the lower lobe, this is also lower lobe, will become the most dependent part. These are most important MCQs and also clinically important questions.